But now today, in this age, you had U.S. personnel, the U.S. government and military, now instead using religion to attack the individuals who are being held in Guantanamo, to attack their personal integrity and to humiliate them. But that was just one way, the desecration of the Quran, how religion was being used as a weapon. There were other ways, from sexual humiliation of prisoners by female interrogators who would exploit an aspect of Muslim culture. You find in very conservative Islamic societies that separation between the sexes. When you go into an Islamic center or a mosque or to a conservative Islamic country, you find that separation. That was exploited in Guantanamo as female interrogators in a very competitive interrogation operation felt they had an advantage over their male counterparts. They felt that their own sexuality as women could be used to their advantage. And some of them would conduct interrogations by stripping off their clothes, standing naked in front of Muslim male prisoners. They would go further than that, rub their own bodies, their private parts, on these shackled prisoners who sat in these interrogation rooms. And even if you look at the official investigations into abuses into Guantanamo prisoners, they suggest that female interrogators even went so far as grabbing the genitals of Muslim male prisoners in the course of interrogating them. I saw that not only as humiliating to the prisoners, but humiliating to these women themselves for conducting themselves in that behavior. Further, humiliating to every woman in this room, because what these women were doing were essentially presenting themselves merely as sex objects in front of male prisoners, not an appropriate way to view a woman merely as a sex object in any society. That was another way in which religion was being used as a weapon. Real quickly, a third way is how prisoners would describe for me a particular interrogation room where they were taken shackled at the wrist, waist, and ankles. And in this particular interrogation room was marked on the floor a large circle. And in the center of that circle was another symbol, and that was the symbol of Satan. The pentagram symbol that represents Satan was marked in the center of that satanic circle. And the prisoners described how they were forced to be put in the center of this satanic circle by interrogators. And these interrogators would then attempt to force these prisoners to bow down and to prostrate, like in the form of the Muslim prayer. Perhaps when you've seen Muslims pray, we bow down and we prostrate, put our forehead to the ground in honor of worshiping one God. Prisoners in Guantanamo, Muslim prisoners who believe in one God, were forced in the center of these satanic circles to make their prostrations and their bowing, as that interrogator would scream at this Muslim prisoner that Satan is your God now, not Allah, not God the Almighty, the creator of all things, the heavens and the earth. This was a way in which a person's belief, a person's faith, was being directly used against him to humiliate him, to violate his integrity. But these were ways in which religion was being used as a weapon. There were other things, from Muslim beards being forcefully shaven by the U.S. military as punishment, and things that I learned later that I wasn't even aware of when I was there. Like when I would read later how certain interrogators would dress up as Catholic priests, and they would go into an interrogation room and see a Muslim prisoner, and then baptize that prisoner, a forceful baptism, saying, "You're not Muslim anymore. I just baptized you. You're now Christian." So this was done all to humiliate the prisoners, to attack their integrity, something which I felt went against my own values, not only as a Muslim American, as a U.S. citizen, but against the values of my nation. And I would raise concerns about some of these things, but not only some of these abuses, but by the conditions, by other things like the ages of some of these prisoners. Some of these prisoners were actually as young as 12 years old. There were 12 to 14-year-old prisoners held in Guantanamo. So I would question, what were we doing in Guantanamo, and was it right? Were we in some way violating our own standards, not only as a country, but also within our own military? Well, the input that I gave to my chain of command, I actually felt was initially very much valued. I would receive from the colonel and the lieutenant colonel who I reported to a stellar officer evaluation report, official award signed by the commanding general. I would then receive something else which I thought was a reward for the input that I was giving to my chain of command, and that was what we call R&R, rest and relaxation. For military soldiers, if you're deployed for a lengthy period of time, you can be sent home for a week or two to see your family, but then you have to return back to your military mission. Well, I got that R&R. I jumped on a plane from Guantanamo back into the United States, first landing in Florida. Then I was supposed to catch a connecting flight to Seattle, Washington to meet my family. But when my plane landed, I never got on that next flight. Instead, I was met by some people, customs and immigration officials first, who would identify me before I even stepped off the plane, checking my ID. And then the customs officials would say that they wanted to search my bags, and then they would search my baggage, my luggage, and my backpack, and make spurious claims that I was carrying some, what they called, suspicious documents. Then out of nowhere, there were intelligence officers from the Army, Army counterintelligence, from the Navy, Naval Criminal Investigators, NCIS, and the FBI. They were there also, 2 agents. And then they would claim I was carrying classified documents, after which they immediately got an arrest warrant and I was arrested in secret. And then I was thrown into a prison cell. I never made it to see my family in Seattle, Washington. They had no idea what had happened to me. It was like I had disappeared. But they would learn of what had happened to me. About 10 days later, when they saw me on the news, when the headline of that day in September of 2003 was that the Muslim chaplain from Guantanamo Bay had been arrested. And I was now actually sitting in a super maximum security prison down in Charleston, South Carolina, a place where our government holds what's termed U.S. citizen enemy combatants. I was in this prison cell for 76 days. And the military would say that me being put in this prison was only a coincidence, because I don't know if I was actually declared what the U.S. government terms enemy combatant. But I know it wasn't any coincidence, because when they transported me from Jacksonville to South Carolina to this maximum security prison, they threw me in the back of this truck. I was shackled. How? The wrists, the waist, and the ankles, just like the way prisoners in Guantanamo were shackled. And then in the back of that truck, an armed guard next to me would take out of his bag these goggles, and they were painted black. And then he put them on my eyes so I couldn't see anything. He took out these heavy industrial type ear devices, put them on my ears. Now I couldn't hear anything. Shackled like a prisoner from Guantanamo, goggles on my eyes, things on my ears. I am being subjected to something that's called sensory deprivation. That's what it's called, sensory deprivation. And it's done to instill fear and intimidation and confusion in the subject. But this was something I knew about because down in Guantanamo, I had seen how prisoners in Guantanamo are subjected to this very same treatment. And this is where I felt now that I'm being declared an enemy combatant, that all of my rights could be stripped from me from my own government, because I knew that the interpretation of my government of the law in Guantanamo was that these prisoners in Guantanamo had no rights. No legal rights, maybe no human rights, and now being treated in that very same way, fearing that all of my rights are being stripped from me. I had no idea where they were taking me. They eventually brought me to this prison cell in the Consolidated Naval Brig in Charleston, and I would be there for 76 days. After 76 days, I was suddenly released. Was never actually charged with these heinous crimes that they had accused me of, which were spying, espionage, aiding the enemy, and had even been threatened with the death penalty. They did try and charge me with lesser offenses, which they called mishandling classified information. They wanted to make the case that I had mishandled or wrongfully took classified material from Guantanamo. So they still wanted to keep me in jail, and they put me on trial. The courts marshaled me. But in a pretrial hearing, they first had to determine that I had something that was indeed actually classified. By this time, I was given some sense of due process, was able to retain an attorney to provide me legal counsel. And I retained a military law expert. And one of the first things we did was demand that this information, that I was carrying classified material, be disclosed. But the only problem is, I knew that they couldn't disclose anything because I didn't have anything that was classified.